U.S. tourism collapse ahead of the World Cup is no longer speculation. It's already unfolding in hotel bookings, visa hesitations, and falling international arrivals. The U.S. tourism industry is not slowing down. It is being pulled into a deeper crisis. Canadian travelers are already stepping back as part of a growing backlash against Trump-era policies. Now that same hesitation is spreading globally, just as the 2026 World Cup approaches. What was supposed to be a $30 billion economic reset is instead colliding with a tourism sector that is already losing momentum.
Former FIFA president Sepp Blatter has backed a proposed fan boycott of World Cup matches in the United States because of the conduct of President Donald Trump and his administration at home and abroad.
Pivot Hotels and Resorts' senior vice president of commercial optimization told CoStar, quote, "We are much less bullish about the World Cup than we were 3 months ago."
The United States entered 2026 with one major expectation. The World Cup would reverse a weakening tourism trend. As the primary host in a joint tournament with Canada and Mexico, it was positioned to capture the largest share of global fan spending. The model was straightforward. International visitors would arrive in large numbers, filling hotels, flights, and city centers. That surge would offset earlier softness and push the industry back into growth. But that assumption is now being challenged. Instead of early momentum, the data is showing hesitation. Hotel bookings are not accelerating the way they typically do ahead of a World Cup. Large blocks of reserved rooms remain partially unfilled. At the same time, ticket prices have surged to extreme levels, while international fans are showing signs of hesitation rather than urgency. The gap between expectation and reality is widening, and it didn't start with the tournament itself. The decline in U.S. tourism did not begin with the World Cup. It began earlier, with a growing backlash against Trump-era policies. Canadian travelers, the single largest source of inbound tourism to the United States, have started pulling back. This shift is tied to trade tensions, tariffs, and broader political friction that has changed how Canadians view travel to the U.S. The scale of that shift matters. Canadian visitors contribute tens of billions of dollars annually, especially through short-distance, high-frequency trips. When that flow weakens, it creates an immediate gap in demand across multiple states and sectors. This is not a temporary dip. It is a structural change in behavior. And by the time the World Cup entered the picture, that gap was already there. That missing baseline demand is what the World Cup was supposed to replace. The World Cup was supposed to offset that weakness. Instead, it is being pulled into the same backlash. International fans are not evaluating the tournament in isolation. They are evaluating the destination, and the same concerns that are affecting Canadian travel are now influencing global decisions. For a fan in Europe, South America, or Asia, the choice is no longer just about football. It is about whether traveling to the United States feels worth it under current conditions. And that shift is already visible in weaker early booking signals. That shift matters because the World Cup depends heavily on international participation. Without that global flow, the economic model begins to weaken. The tournament is not causing the decline, it is exposing it. There are two layers driving this hesitation, and they reinforce each other. The first is cost. Ticket prices have surged far beyond historical norms, in some cases reaching thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. When combined with flights, accommodation, and local expenses, the total cost of attending a single match can easily exceed $5,000 to $10,000 per person. That alone narrows the audience. But the second layer is more critical: policy risk. Under Trump's second term, immigration enforcement has tightened, and the perception of entering the United States has changed. Reports of stricter screening, visa complications, and unpredictable border experiences have created a layer of uncertainty for international travelers. Even if those risks are not universal, the perception is enough. Fans are no longer asking just, "Can I afford this trip?" They are asking, "Is this trip worth the risk?" And when both answers become uncertain, demand stalls. On the surface, the World Cup still appears stable. Tickets are listed as sold out, and host cities are preparing for large crowds. But beneath that surface, the structure is fragile. A growing share of tickets is being held by corporate buyers and resellers rather than committed fans. Hotel prices are set for a surge that has not yet materialized, and many travelers are waiting, expecting prices to fall closer to the event. This creates a disconnect between appearance and reality. If real demand does not fill that gap, the adjustment will be sudden. Tickets will be discounted, hotel rates will drop, and what looked like a high-demand event could quickly reveal empty capacity. That is not a healthy market, it is a mispriced one, and mispriced markets tend to correct, often quickly. In a shared tournament, demand does not disappear, it shifts. Canada is positioned to absorb part of that shift. It offers a more predictable entry process, fewer perceived risks, and a more stable political environment. For international fans, that changes the calculation. They can still attend the World Cup, but they can choose where to base their trip. At the same time, Canadian travelers who might have visited the United States are staying domestic or redirecting elsewhere. That keeps spending within Canada rather than exporting itself. This is not a dramatic shift in headlines, it is a quiet reallocation of demand. And that reallocation is happening at the exact moment the US needs it most. But over time, that reallocation reshapes where the economic benefits actually land. The $30 billion projection for the World Cup was built on one key assumption: strong, consistent international demand. That assumption is now under pressure from multiple angles. Canadian demand is weakening due to political backlash. Global fans are hesitating due to cost and policy risk. Early booking signals are weaker than expected. When those factors combine, projections begin to break down. Even a 15 to 20% shortfall in expected tourism would translate into billions of dollars in lost activity. And unlike ticket sales, lost tourism spending cannot be recovered once the moment passes. This is how a projected boom turns into a fragile outcome. Not through a single failure, but through multiple small gaps that add up. Not because the event fails to happen, but because the demand behind it never fully arrives. The 2026 World Cup will go ahead. The matches will be played, and the global audience will still tune in. But the economic reality is shifting. The United States is entering this event with a tourism sector already under strain. The loss of Canadian visitors created the first crack. The global hesitation now widens it. And the World Cup, instead of reversing the trend, is revealing how deep the problem runs. For Canada, this creates an opportunity built on stability and predictability. For the United States, it raises a more difficult question. If a global event of this scale cannot restore tourism demand, what will?
A confidant, indeed, of the Chancellor of Germany has raised the idea of a potential World Cup boycott in a German newspaper. This politician, Jürgen Hart, had said dropping out the tournament would only be considered as a last resort in order to get Trump to see sense on the Greenland issue, pointing out that Trump has made it clear how important the World Cup is to him.
Germany has just dropped a bombshell on the world's biggest sporting event, a World Cup boycott aimed directly at the United States, triggered not by football, but by Donald Trump's campaign to pull Greenland into America's strategic orbit. What began as a political provocation between Washington and Copenhagen has now exploded into a crisis threatening to destabilize the entire 2026 World Cup, and the ripple effect is spreading fast. One by one, European nations are reassessing whether they can, in good conscience or even in good security, compete on American soil while Trump turns the tournament into a stage for geopolitical leverage. Yet in the middle of this escalating storm, something remarkable is happening. As Europe looks for a way to stand its ground without abandoning the competition altogether, Canada suddenly emerges as the quiet alternative, the dependable co-host that isn't dragging world football into a diplomatic confrontation. What started with Germany's warning may soon reshape the entire map of the 2026 World Cup, separating the politically charged American venues from the stable, trusted Canadian ones. The controversy erupted when influential German political voices began openly questioning whether their national team should refuse to play matches on American soil. This wasn't a fringe sentiment. It reflected a genuine frustration inside Europe over Washington's growing readiness to use the World Cup as an extension of foreign policy. Germany's warning created shockwaves almost instantly. Within days, similar questions surfaced in the UK, Scotland, France, and even the Netherlands, all countries that normally treat World Cups as untouchable. And the spark that ignited this movement was Trump's insistence that Greenland, a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, is essential to U.S. national security. The idea of pressuring an ally to concede territory was explosive enough, but when Trump linked his Arctic ambitions with economic threats and diplomatic leverage, European governments saw something much larger at stake: the erosion of long-standing norms within NATO and the broader international system.
This is a World Cup during particularly difficult, politically fraught times, where even if you are a citizen of a nation that will be allowed in, as far as we know, there's no guarantee of your safety.
At the same time, fans and supporters raised separate concerns that had been building since 2025, from stringent U.S. visa restrictions to the lingering anxiety around unpredictable immigration enforcement. The fear wasn't theoretical. Several African and South American supporter groups already warned that they might not be able to travel safely or in adequate numbers. This led many federations to an uncomfortable conclusion. Participating in a North American World Cup is one thing, participating specifically in Trump's America is another. And because the tournament is shared across 3 countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, Europe began asking whether a boycott had to be total at all. Why not avoid the American venues and continue the competition in cities that aren't defined by political confrontation? That question, more than anything, reshaped the conversation. From the moment Trump revived his interest in acquiring Greenland, the reaction across Europe was a mix of disbelief and strategic anxiety. Denmark immediately rejected the idea, calling Greenland's sovereignty non-negotiable. Several Arctic and NATO analysts highlighted the destabilizing effect of linking territorial ambition with a major international event. Rather than separating diplomacy from sport, Trump blurred the lines entirely, sending a clear message that he viewed the World Cup as a stage to amplify American power. That shift in tone had consequences. The United States was no longer seen simply as a co-host. It was seen as a political actor trying to imprint its agenda onto the tournament. European officials feared that participation could be interpreted as tacit acceptance of Washington's approach, an outcome they were unwilling to risk. The reaction from Germany captured that sentiment most clearly. When German officials described the World Cup as leverage that could be used to force Washington to see sense, it signaled a broader realization. The tournament itself had become part of the geopolitical equation. While Greenland was the spark, the deeper frustration runs much broader. Across multiple countries, European football associations and their governments quietly share the same concern. The United States under Trump is unpredictable. Visa rules change with little warning. Enforcement can be aggressive. Stadium security policies remain unclear. And the political climate inside the U.S. oscillates between polarization and unrest. For many officials, this is not a question of ideology, but of logistics and safety. They need to guarantee that fans can enter, travel, and attend matches without fear of detention or confrontation. They need clear rules and stable conditions, 2 things that have been in short supply. This explains why many of these federations did not talk about abandoning the tournament altogether. Instead, they began exploring the idea of shifting their presence to Canada or Mexico, where the political controversy does not exist. That's the subtle but important distinction. Europe isn't rejecting the World Cup. Europe is rejecting the risks attached to Trump's version of it. Greenland's position in this story matters to Canada in a profound way. Ottawa has long worked with Copenhagen on Arctic governance, shared defense strategies, and environmental management. Trump's claim that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security wasn't just provocative, it threatened a balance Canada has spent decades reinforcing. That's why Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, responded by emphasizing the need for predictable, rules-based cooperation in the Arctic. Without directly attacking Washington, Carney positioned Canada alongside Denmark and other northern partners who reject the idea of territorial bargaining. In Europe, this stance did not go unnoticed. As Washington escalated the rhetoric, Canada became the calm, steady voice calling for restraint. For countries considering a boycott, this contrast matters. It reinforces the notion that avoiding U.S. venues is not abandoning the World Cup, it's avoiding unnecessary risk while respecting international norms that Canada openly supports. As the debate expanded, a pattern became clear. European teams and supporters repeatedly framed their concerns around American politics, not the tournament itself. That left Canada in an unusually strong position. It is a host nation without the controversy, without the diplomatic tension, without the immigration barriers, and without the geopolitical theatrics. Canada offers simplicity, straightforward entry rules, stable public order, and a political climate not defined by confrontation. For federations balancing diplomatic principles with the desire to compete, this is exactly what they need, a way to participate without endorsing Washington's strategy or exposing their supporters to uncertainty. Some commentators in Europe have already described 2026 as a split World Cup, where the American segment becomes politically charged, while the Canadian and Mexican segments become the functional heart of the tournament. Whether that prediction proves accurate will depend on what Europe decides, but the direction of travel is unmistakable. Germany's unexpected challenge has forced the world to rethink what the 2026 World Cup actually represents. Instead of a moment of North American unity, the tournament is now a symbol of a larger confrontation between Trump's vision of power and Europe's insistence on stability and sovereignty. And in this battle, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The world may still want to play, just not in America. As more European nations explore alternatives, Canada rises naturally into the spotlight, a co-host untainted by controversy and aligned with the international norms that Europe is determined to defend. Trump sought to dominate the World Cup. Instead, he may be watching the tournament quietly shift northward toward the one host nation the world still trusts. Trump planned to dominate the World Cup. Instead, Canada is becoming the real host the world trusts.